My name is Omar. I grew up in Marrakesh, a city that enchants the eyes but often deceives the heart. To outsiders, everything seems magical. The lively streets, the scent of spices, the sound of the call to prayer echoing between the minarets, and the tourists dazzled by every detail. But what no one sees, what no one wants to see, is the weight of silence. Not the tranquil silence, but the kind that tightens the throat, forcing us to whisper the name of Jesus, as if it were a crime. And, in fact, for many here, that's exactly what it is. Being Christian in Morocco isn't just a spiritual choice, it's a rupture. It's being seen as a traitor to your culture, your family, and the faith of your ancestors. Since I was a child, I learned that following Jesus would be a lonely and dangerous path. I remember my mother hiding a Bible inside an old cookbook, which she never used. It was her hiding place, and she showed it to me when I was only 12. We locked ourselves in a room, and she looked me straight in the eye and said, "This faith will cost you dearly, my son. But everything truly valuable requires sacrifice." I only truly understood what she meant years later. When I turned 17, a college friend invited me to a gathering. He didn't say much, just asked me to trust him. We went to a simple house in an ordinary neighborhood. It looked like any other, but when I walked through that door, I entered another world. Inside, a small group sat on the floor, an open Bible between them. No music, no microphones, no pulpit, just low voices, discreet tears, joined hands, and full hearts. It was more than a service. It was a sacred hiding place, a haven for faith. From then on, I began attending these secret meetings. Never in the same place, never with the same people, and always with great caution. We arrived at different times, turned off our cell phones, and covered the windows with blankets. It was almost like planning an operation, but instead of weapons, we brought faith. We learned to speak in codes. Reading the Bible became having tea. Jesus was the master. Scripture was the book of wisdom. Everything was designed to protect us, because at any moment, someone could be listening. And yes, there was fear, a fear that needed no words. It was in the smell of cold sweat, in the quick glances out the window, in the hands that trembled as they opened the pages of... The religious police didn't wear uniforms, but you knew who they were. Always on street corners, watching, memorizing faces, sniffing out anyone who looked different. Tension was part of the routine. At every meeting, at every prayer, the question was, will they discover us today? Even with all the risk, we never stopped meeting, because there was something stronger than the certainty that God was with us. On that dirt floor, among candles and cups of tea, we experienced a freedom the outside world could never offer. It's strange to say, but it was in secrecy that my faith grew stronger. It was in the darkness that I found the light. Today, I still carry that faith, perhaps with more courage, perhaps with more scars, but with the same certainty my mother taught me in that locked room. What costs dearly is worth more, and Jesus is worth it all. The faith that endures, even when the door breaks. In our world, an overly curious neighbor can turn into a snitch. A hurt friend can destroy everything with a single, misplaced sentence. I've seen it happen. I've seen homes torn apart by an anonymous tip. I've seen brothers in Christ lose their jobs because of a Bible in a backpack. I've seen mothers begging for news of their children who were taken for endless interrogations in windowless rooms where hope barely traits. Even so, we continue to meet, because when you live with your voice muzzled, when you have to hide in your heart what should be sung, these encounters become the only place where your soul breathes. It's where you can say, even if only in a whisper, I believe in Jesus, without having to look over our shoulder. Where we can sing, even if quietly, with our eyes closed and our chest open. That March afternoon, we went to the home of Jusef, an older brother with white hair who lived in the Medina, near the spice market. His house had a beautiful courtyard with cedar columns and a small pool in the middle, where jasmine petals floated gently. It was one of the few places where we still felt protected, as if time itself slowed down there. There were 10 of us that afternoon. Some had walked for hours. Others had to lie to their families, saying they were going to study or visit someone. Everyone carried the same invisible weight on their shoulders, that of living a hidden faith. Yusuf opened the meeting with a calm prayer, his steady voice marked by years of conversation with God in the midst of the storm. We read the Psalms. We shared our struggles. There were hugs. There were tears. There was that silence that only exists when words are no longer enough. It was then that we heard the knocking. It wasn't light. It wasn't someone asking for sugar. It was a heavy, rhythmic, urgent thump, a sound that clearly said, "We know you're there." If you've ever had to hide your faith, if you've ever felt fear just for believing, you understand what happened in that moment. The air froze. Our eyes met in silence, filled with panic. Yusef stood up slowly, as if knowing that any false move could bring everything crashing down. He took a few steps. He tried to remain calm, but there was no time. The door burst open. 6 young men entered, all of them familiar. Karim, the butcher's son. Amin, the carpet seller. Hicham, the delivery man who always smiled when he saw me. Everyday faces, neighborhood faces. But there, in that moment, there was something different about them. Their eyes were filled with a strange kind of anger, the kind that comes when someone believes they're doing the right thing, even if it's brutal. They didn't ask for an explanation. They didn't ask what we were doing. They invaded our space with fury and contempt. They shouted, they accused. "Traitors!" Karim shouted, pointing his finger at us as if we were criminals. Yusuf tried to intervene. His hands were raised, trying to maintain peace. His voice was firm, but his legs were shaking. "Please, brothers, this is my home. We're just praying. We haven't hurt anyone." But he didn't even finish speaking. Amin shoved him hard against the wall. The impact made the bronze lamp swing over our heads. "Brothers, brothers don't abandon their faith. Brothers don't follow foreign gods," he shouted. Fatima, a courageous sister in her 50s with 3 children raised alone, tried to retreat, perhaps seeking shelter in the kitchen, but Hicham blocked her, arms crossed, guarding her. There, the refuge became a battlefield. What was once a sanctuary of faith became an arena of judgment. The gentle smile I knew evaporated. In its place was a sharp, contemptuous laugh. "No one leaves until we understand what you're doing," he said dryly. My heart raced so fast I thought everyone could hear it. I looked around for a way out, some kind of plan, but there was none. The windows were covered, the door blocked by 2 of them. We were 10 unarmed people, surrounded by 6 young men inflamed by a certainty that made them dangerous. Then Karim saw the Bible. It stood in the center of our circle, open to the Book of Psalms, its pages softened with use, underlined in blue ink, and notes in the margin. It was the only complete copy we had, the Bible Yusuf had kept from his grandfather. Karim walked toward it with calm, almost ceremonial steps, stopped before the book, as if before something forbidden, and stared at it like someone observing a snake. With a sudden movement, he lifted the volume from the floor. "Is this your holy book? Choose, Quran or this," he mocked, a play on words and humiliation. I tried to respond, but my voice died in my throat. Karim looked at me as if I were a stranger. He'd known me since I was a boy. Our mothers had shopped at the same bakery. We'd played in the neighborhood streets. Now, however, I was a traitor. "You've always been different, Omar," he said with a calmness that chilled me. "Let's see how much your faith is worth." And then it started to tear. The sound of tearing paper filled the courtyard, dry, violent, as if every page was screaming. I saw Psalm 23 shredded to shreds. I saw the Gospel of John disintegrate on the ground like old leaves. Jesus' words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," were crumpled between Karim's fingers before flying into the air. "No!" Fatima cried, standing up to try to stop it. One of the young men grabbed her tightly and pushed her back. She fell, frightened and helpless. Yusuf closed his eyes, his lips forming a silent prayer. Tears streamed down his face. Karim wasn't tearing out of blind rage. There was method, intentional malice. Each torn page was a message. Their faith was worthless. The God we worshipped was weak. Amin, near the fireplace in the corner, grabbed some dry twigs and lit a fire. The flames, small at first, grew quickly. "Let's help their God disappear," he said, with a smile I'll never forget. Karim approached the fire with a handful of pages. He held them over the flames for a second, as if savoring the moment, and then dropped them. The paper caught fire. The edges blackened, then the flames rose, and the familiar beloved letters began, the ink bubbling, the words turning to smoke. I felt a knot in my stomach, as if someone were burning a part of my own heart. Fatima tried to approach again, sobbing, but was pushed away again. Many of us just watched, paralyzed between horror and disbelief. The Bible burned in the fireplace, and with it, it seemed, a bit of our courage was also burned. But there, in the midst of that fear, one thing became clear. Burning materials doesn't erase what's inside us. Even watching the pages turn to ash, the words had already been planted within us. The pages curled in the fire like hands clenching in pain. One by one they writhed until they turned to dust. They continued to feed the flames with the remaining pieces. Genesis, Proverbs, Paul's letters, all dissolving into a thick dark smoke that rose to the ceiling and spread like an invisible morning. The smell was suffocating. Burnt paper, melted ink, a bitter odor that clung to the throat, the eyes, the soul. But the worst part wasn't the smell. It was what it represented. It was as if we were watching our faith turn to ash right before our eyes. I wanted to get up, scream, grab the Bible back, put out the fire with my bare hands, do something. But my body wouldn't move. My legs were locked. My heart was pounding in my throat. Fear, mixed with shock, immobilized me. Inside me, there was only one desperate prayer. repeated over and over. God, do something. Please, do something. Karim threw the last page into the fire. Then he wiped his hands on his pants, as if he'd soiled himself with garbage. He opened his arms theatrically and stared at us like an actor in his grand finale. If your God is real, he said, loud and clear, then let him come and save you now. The silence that followed was absolute. He waited. We all waited. For a few seconds, which felt like hours. No one breathed. No thunder. No earthquake. No miraculous intervention. Only the sound of fire devouring the last sacred words. Then he laughed. A wide-open, mocking. The others laughed along with him. They clapped, high-fiving each other as if they'd won some invisible war. I thought your God was more powerful than children's stories, Karim said, already heading for the exit. One by one they left. Their laughter echoed in the courtyard, bouncing off the cedar walls, then merged with the noise of the city outside, the distant sound of motorcycle, vendors calling out to customers, and in the background the call to evening prayer. And we stayed. The fire was still burning. Ashes danced in the air, like flakes of dirty snow. Fatima wept softly, embraced by another sister. Yusuf was still on his knees, his eyes fixed on the spot where the Bible had now reduced to charcoal in memory. Some brothers covered their faces. Others simply stared into space, lost in trauma, and I stood there, my heart aching at the words that still echoed. If your God exists, may he save you right now. And without saying anything out loud, something inside me responded, Lord, save them, for they know not what they do. No one moved for a long time. The fire slowly died down, leaving only embers pulsing a dying orange. The smoke rose slowly, like an unhurried prayer, spiraling up to the ceiling. Ashes continued to fall, landing softly on our shoulders, in our hair, in our silently open hand. It was as if the word, even though burned, was touching us in another way, as if to say, you're still here, and so am I. Fatima was the first to break the silence. Her tears came in waves, deep, almost visceral, like the lament of someone who has just lost a family member. And, in a way, that was exactly what it was. We hadn't just lost an object. That Bible was more than a book. It was a symbol, a living testament to the fact that our faith existed, that it endured, even hidden, even silently. And now, it had been reduced to ashes before our eyes. Yusuf stood slowly, as if his knees had turned to stone. He walked to the fireplace, stopped before the ashes and stood there, silent. His face showed neither anger nor panic, just an old sadness, the kind that doesn't scream, but weighs heavily. The sadness of someone who has seen so much fall apart. It was my grandfather's Bible, he murmured, almost to himself. He brought it from Tangiers in 1980, when it was still possible to get an entire copy. He took a deep breath, as if needing to carefully recall it. He gave it to me when he was sick, and made me promise to take care of it, that one day I would pass it on to my children. His voice broke on that last sentence. I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't say anything. No one did. There were no right words at that moment. What kind of comfort can you offer when something sacred is desecrated before you? Samir, a new brother in the faith, an engineer who had converted only 6 months earlier, knelt by the fireplace. He reached out as if to grab the ashes, but when his fingers touched the dust, he stopped. Ashes drip between your fingers. The more you try to hold them, the less there is. But why didn't God do anything? He asked. His voice was weak, almost broken. If he is with us, why did he let this happen? The question hung in the air like an open wound. We all thought about it, but it was Samir who had the courage to voice it. Yusuf turned slowly. His eyes were red, but there was a firmness there, something the pain hadn't been able to break. Because God is not a bodyguard, he said calmly, nor a magician who responds to provocations. He paused. He does not respond to blasphemy with fire from heaven. He responds with mercy. Samir lowered his head. He didn't argue. He simply absorbed those words, like someone realizing for the first time that God's love isn't vengeful. It's deeper and harder to understand. We started cleaning, not to pretend nothing had happened, but because we needed to do something with our hands. Something practical, something simple, something that would give us back, even if only for a short time, a sense of control. Fatima picked up the broom. He swept the ashes away carefully, as if touching something sacred. He scooped up what was left with the dustpan and placed it in a cloth bag, the kind we used to store bread in. Yusuf took the bag reverently and placed it on a high shelf in his library. I'll keep it, he simply said, to remember. We opened the windows to try to eliminate the smell of smoke. The night wind crept in slowly, bringing with it the familiar scent of jasmine and the spices of the souk. But the smell of burnt paper was still there, clinging to curtains, pillows, and our clothes. It was a smell that wouldn't wash away with soap and water. A smell that would linger, even after the air cleared, a reminder that it had, in fact, happened. I tried to wipe the soot from the wall beside the fireplace, but my hands trembled. Each time I wiped, my mind took me back, to the sound of pages tearing, to Kareem's laughter, to the fire consuming the words we'd read so many times. It was as if it were etched not just in my memory, but in my body. Omar. The voice was soft, almost a whisper. I turned. It was Layla, one of the oldest sisters in the group, a nurse at a public hospital, a strong woman, always with a ready smile. But at that moment her eyes were red, swollen from crying. She looked at me as if asking for help, not with words, but with presence. Even so, Layla looked at me with that quiet compassion that only someone who deals with pain daily can offer. Gently, she took the cloth from my hand. "Leave it," he said softly. "You need to cry too." And she was right. I'd been holding back the whole time, as if shedding tears would be admitting defeat, as if crying, there, in front of others, was a betrayal of the courage I believed I needed to demonstrate. But when Layla hugged me, something inside me simply gave way. An invisible dam broke. I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried for the destroyed Bible, for our ridiculed faith. I cried for feeling alone, for living in a place where believing differently can turn you into an enemy. I cried for the hidden meetings, for the lies we tell to protect ourselves, for the fear that haunts me every day like a shadow. And I didn't cry alone. Others came. We embraced like wounded brothers. We cried together, each pouring out our own pain, but holding the others as well, because it was too heavy to carry alone. After a while, Yusuf stood and called us back to the center of. There was no Bible and just us, sitting on the cold mosaic floor, holding hands. "Let us pray," he said in a firm but gentle voice. There was an uncomfortable silence, until Samir, confused, asked, "Pray for whom?" "For them," Yusuf replied. "By they, by those who did this to us?" Samir's disbelief was understandable. "Yes, for them," Yusuf confirmed, "because Jesus didn't teach us to love only those who love us. He asked us to pray specially by those who persecute." It was like swallowing stones, but we pray. With trembling voices, tears still falling, wounds open, we prayed. Every word hurt. Every phrase of forgiveness was a deliberate choice. But we prayed for Kareem, for Amin, for Hicham, and for the others too. We asked God to reach them, to forgive them, to open their eyes, to save them. It was a prayer that bled, but it was true. By the time we finished, the sky was already lightening. The sun was slowly approaching the horizon, but the city was still asleep. We said goodbye in silence, with long hugs and looks that said more than any word. We set off through the narrow streets of the old quarter, where only cats watched us pass. Each of us went our own way. I went alone. The stone floor was still damp from the early morning. The sky was dark blue. Soon the first call to prayer would echo through the mosques. I stopped at a corner and looked up. The stars were still there, indifferent witnesses to what had happened in that simple house. In that hidden place, we had faced our own ordeal. I arrived home just as the muezzin began to sing. I took off my shoes, washed my face, and sat on the edge of my bed. The smell of smoke still clung to my skin and clothes. I was exhausted, body and soul. It was then that the phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated. It could be anything. A nosy neighbor, the police, a trap. But I answered. "Omar," a voice on the other end said breathlessly. It was Rashid, a friend from college. Someone who knew our faith, who had been to a few meetings. "Rashid?" I asked, my stomach churning. "What happened?" "It's Kareem," he said. "One of the boys who were at Yusuf's house last night. He was in an accident. Serious. He's between life and death." For a second, I thought the phone had slipped from my hand. The floor seemed to have disappeared. Kareem. The same one who tore up the Bible in front of us. The same one who mocked our faith. Now I was fighting to survive, and I stood there, silent, listening to Rashid's agitated breathing, listening to my heart beating wildly. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Justice? Fear? Or compassion? Maybe all of these at the same time. And in the midst of that chaos, a soft voice inside me said, "Now is the time to live what you prayed for." Have you ever witnessed God answer in such an unexpected way that it left you speechless? If so, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes it's when all seems lost that he decides to reveal himself. Rashid's call came like a bolt from the blue. His voice was choked, almost breathless, like someone speaking while running or holding back tears. "Kareem had an accident," he said in one. My heart stopped for a second. On the way to Ouarzazate, he was alone, riding the motorcycle. He lost control on a curve in the stone road. The motorcycle was destroyed. "Omar, it's a miracle he's still alive." I remained silent, my mind struggling to grasp the reality of what I had just heard. It had been only 3 hours since Kareem had left Yusuf's house. 3 hours since he had mocked God, torn up our Bible, and thrown what was sacred to us into the fire. 3 hours since he had defied the Creator himself. And now, between life... "What hospital is he in?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Ibn Tufail," Rashid replied. He just arrived by ambulance. He's in very serious condition. His family is there, and the doctors don't know if he'll make it. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The dawn light was already beginning to pale the bedroom walls, while outside the city was waking up with its noisy honking horns, the shouts of the clinking of tea carts. But inside me, the silence was heavy. What should I feel? Justice? Quiet relief? Or fear of the kind of God who responds with fury? None of it made sense. The knot in my stomach tightened. I knelt beside the bed, my hands buried in the rumpled sheets. I whispered, "I don't know what this means. I don't know if it was your hand, or if it was just chance, but don't let him die. Not like this. Give him another chance." I wasn't asking for justice. I was asking for mercy, for something that neither he nor I deserved, but deep down, neither did I. I stayed there for almost an hour, praying with my face to the ground. When I got up, my body felt light, but my soul restless. I changed my clothes and went to the hospital. The Ibn Tufayl was in the modern part of town, a white building with cramped windows and a parking lot that never had. I arrived when the sun was already scorching the asphalt like a live coal. The emergency room waiting room was packed with people. Children cried, mothers sat on plastic benches, elderly people dozed with their heads leaning against the wall. The smell of alcohol and sweat hung in the air, along with the anxiety that filled the room like smoke. I saw Karim's family in a corner of the. His mother sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her face buried in her hands. His father paced back and forth, muttering prayers under his breath and stroking his beard nervously. His brothers were completely silent, their eyes red from crying. They saw me, but no one asked. In moments like these, pain erases division, faith, ideology, even anger. Everything dissolves in the face of the fear of losing someone. I sat in a far corner. I just watched. I just waited. I heard snatches of conversation, whispers, fragments of sentences. The motorcycle broke on impact, lost a lot of blood. They shouldn't have been able to bring him in alive. But the phrase that repeated itself like an echo was always the same. They don't know how he's still alive. Time passed slowly. The midday sun streamed through the windows, drawing rectangles of light on, and there I sat, trying to understand what God was doing. Have you ever seen pride crumble in silence? Have you ever seen fear reveal who someone really is? Nurses came and went like shadows, clipboards clutched to their chests. Doctors in stained lab coats paused before Karim's family for brief but weighty seconds. He's still in critical condition. He's unconscious. We're doing everything we. These phrases were delivered with technique, but they made the heart grow heavier with each repetition. The room was suffocating. I got up and walked aimlessly through the hallway. My footsteps echoed on the icy floor, and everything around me seemed in slow motion. I stopped in front of a window overlooking the parking lot. Outside, the sun was already slanting, casting long shadows on the concrete. I saw an ambulance arrive with its siren on, and then I saw them both, Amin and Hicham. They came running, their faces pale, their eyes filled with desperate haste. They went straight to the family, hugged Karim's father, and whispered something urgent. From where I stood, their gestures spoke volumes. They were devastated. The same people who, hours before, mocked, laughed, tore pages of our faith, now trembled with fear. The fear of losing a friend, the fear that the worst would become real. It was at that moment that something inside me changed. They weren't monsters, they were just kids. Kids shaped by a culture of intolerance, kids taught to fear what's different, kids who thought they were defending the truth, but who in fact, were just repeating the fear they inherited. I returned to the waiting room. I sat in the same corner as before. That's when Hicham saw me. Our eyes met. It lasted only a second, but I saw the question. Why are you here? Did he think I wanted to see their downfall up close? That I'd come to say, see, it was punishment? But I didn't say anything. He looked away, shame in his eyes. The hours dragged on. Afternoon fell, night fell, and the room slowly emptied. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like an uncomfortable reminder that nothing here was natural. Only the pain was. Karim's family remained steadfast, and strangely, so did I. Almost midnight. A young doctor with dark circles under his eyes and an exhausted expression came out of the ICU. Everyone stood up at once. He stopped, took a deep breath, and said, "He's stabilized. He's still in critical condition. The next few hours are crucial, but if he makes it through the night, there's a chance." Karim's mother fell into her husband's arms. She wept as if the weight of an entire world had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't joy, it was the terror of hope. I stayed in the hospital until the sun came. I dozed in a hard chair, leaning against the cold wall. I had confused dreams, fires that burned but didn't consume, pages that danced in the air like autumn leaves, voices that cried out silently. When I woke, The first rays of sunlight were streaming through the window, creating golden streaks across the dirt floor. Karim had survived the night. He was still far from recovery, but he was alive. That afternoon, rumors began to spread through the neighborhood. In the souk, the bakery, the tea lines, and the alleys of Medina, people were talking. It was punishment, some said. He mocked the faith, burned the Bible, and that very night, he almost died. Others tried to rationalize. He always drove fast. It was just an accident. There's nothing spiritual about it, but even they spoke in hushed tone. As if, deep down, they also knew that the time between the blasphemy and the accident was too short. As if, somehow, heaven had responded too quickly to be ignored. I didn't join the conversation. I didn't use that moment to prove anything. I didn't beat my chest and say, "See, God is just." I just remained silent, and I kept praying. Every morning, every night, for Karim's life, for his salvation, for the restoration of what was broken in that house. I kept praying to God for Karim's recovery, for his life, for his heart, for the truth he still needed to find. On the third day after the accident, Yusuf called me, his voice calm, almost hesitant. "Omar, have you been to the hospital yet?" "Every day," I replied without thinking. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I've been praying for him too," he confessed. I know it sounds strange, but I can't get those hands-ripping pages out of the Bible out of my head, that challenge thrown into the fire. And yet, I want him to live. I want him to know the truth. I lowered my voice and said, "God is doing something, Yusuf. I don't know what, but something is happening." And it was that late afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the rooftops of Marrakesh, that my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Omar, it's Amin. Karim is awake, conscious, and wants to see you." I read that sentence over and over, as if in a dream. Karim, the same boy who had burned our Bible, who had laughed at our faith, who had challenged us, wanted to see me. The hospital was quieter that night. The long hallways, with their strong smell of antiseptic mixed with the aroma of cold food, echoed beneath my footsteps on the linoleum floor. I followed the nurse toward the ICU, my heart racing, my head full of unanswered questions. What did Karim want to tell me? Was he angry? Was he accusing me? Or did he simply need someone to listen to his pain? She stopped in front of a door with a small reinforced glass window. "Room 304, he said quietly. "He's very weak. Don't tire him. 15 minutes, tops." I nodded, unable to speak. She opened the door and motioned for me to enter. The room was dark, lit only by a small yellowish lamp beside the bed. Machines beeped rhythmically, wires connected to bandaged arms. At the center of it all, almost unrecognizable, stood Karim. His face looked like a battle map, deep cuts stitched shut with black stitches. One eye so swollen he could barely open it, the other staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His lip was split, his jaw swollen and purple. But what struck me most wasn't the visible wound, it was the look in his eyes. Gone was the arrogant young man who had invaded our meeting, laughing and challenging the faith of others. No, it was the look of someone who had seen something beyond, of someone who had crossed an invisible threshold and returned a different person. "Omar," he called, his voice hoarse, as if his throat were full of sand. I approached carefully and sat in the chair beside the bed. My hands were shaking, but I hid them by resting them on my knees. "Karim, they told me to come," I said quietly. He gave a slight nod, but the movement brought a grimace of pain. "I needed to see you," he said, each word taking a huge effort. "I needed to tell you something." I waited, the silence between us heavy, laden with all that was left unsaid, the burned pages, the cruel laughter, the challenge hurled at God. Karim closed his good eye for, as if gathering the strength to speak. When Karim opened his eyes again, they were already filled with tears. That night started right after I left Yusuf's house, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "I was on my motorcycle, alone. I was angry, Omar. Angry at you. Angry at everything I heard there. I sped up as if I could escape that nuisance. As if the wind could erase what I had done. I wanted to prove that nothing could touch me, that I was invincible." He paused for a moment. He took a deep breath, his chest rising with effort. The heart monitor beeped rapidly and steadily. And then, around a sharp bend, it happened. He continued. "Have you lost control?" I asked, almost voiceless. Karim shook his head firmly. "No." The bike was still responding. I didn't fall by mistake. It was something else. There was a thick silence, as if the air itself was waiting for what was to come. "A light," he said, staring into space. "A white light. Too white to be a lighthouse. A reflection. It came from above, as if the entire sky had... I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was so intense that I tried to cover my eyes with my arm, but it was all there. I couldn't escape. The road disappeared. The motorcycle disappeared. There was only that light. Tears streamed down his bruised cheeks, mingling with the salt and dried blood. He trembled, as if reliving the moment before me. It was as if that light was inside me. he continued. I couldn't see anything, I just felt. And then I heard. I held my breath. I heard what Karim asked, even though I already knew what he was going to say. A voice, he replied, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. But it wasn't human. It wasn't coming from outside, nor from just one place. It was everything at once. It was as if the universe itself was speaking to me. His voice broke in the air. And what did she say? I insisted softly. Karim closed the only eye he could still move and whispered, now you know. Those 4 words seemed to float in the room, passing through walls and machines, echoing in something that no technology could register. I couldn't answer. Karim continued, crying silently. That's all he said, Omar. But I knew instantly who it was. I didn't need to ask. It was him. The same God I had defied. The same God I had called a lie. The same God whose book I had destroyed with my own hands. His voice faltered, and for a moment only the sound of the heart monitor could be heard. He took a deep breath, and tears welled up again. After that, everything went dark. I heard a loud bang, and all I remember is waking up here, with doctors holding me down and my mother screaming. I remained silent, trying to process what I had just heard. Outside, the sound of gurneys and nurses reminded the world once again that we're alive, but inside that room, time had stopped. Something sacred had happened there. Karim looked at me again, with a serenity I had never seen in him. The doctors say it's a miracle I'm alive. They said I crashed into a stone wall at over 100 miles an hour. The motorcycle broke in half. I should have died right there. But here I am, alive, conscious, and all I can think about are those words. Now you know me. He extended his right hand toward me. It was wrapped in bandages and IV line. The gesture was shaky, fragile, but charged with something pure. Omar, forgive me, he said, his voice breaking. Forgive me for everything, for the pages, for the words, for the laughter. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand, but now I do. His voice broke into sobs. And there, sitting beside a hospital bed, with the smell of medicine in the air and the presence of God hovering invisibly between us, I knew no fire, no offense, no blasphemy was too great for the grace of Christ. The tears completely overcame. Karim's shoulders shook. Sobs came in waves, and the sound of the monitors accelerated along with his suffering. I held his hand, the same hand that days before had torn those sacred pages and thrown them into the fire. Now that hand trembled, reaching for something greater, forgiveness. I forgive you, Karim, I said, and as I said it, I felt a lightness fill my chest, as if something heavy released. I forgive you with all my heart. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had, but his eyes still held an urgency that cut me to the core. But I need more than forgiveness, he said hoarsely. I need to know this God. I want to know who it is who spoke to me that, who saved me when he shouldn't have, who had mercy even when I didn't. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain something so profound. He is Jesus, I replied simply. The same Jesus we were reading about when they invaded our meeting. The same one whose words you burned. He is the one who said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Karim closed his eyes, absorbing every word. I want to know you, he repeated, like a prayer. Teach me, please. It doesn't matter the cost. It doesn't matter if I have to hide, lie to my family, leave everything behind. I just need to know you. It was at that moment that everything made sense to me. Why hadn't God sent lightning to Jeff's house that night? Why hadn't he manifested himself with visible power? Why had he allowed those sacred pages to burn away while we wept helplessly? Because God wasn't playing a game of appearances, defending his honor with quick demonstrations. He was playing the long game. He was planting seeds in the heart of a persecutor. I'll teach you, I promised him, looking straight into his eyes. But it won't be easy. It'll be dangerous. It'll hurt. I don't care, he replied in that broken but convinced voice. That voice I heard that night is worth any price. If this story touched you, please leave a like so it can reach more people. And if you'd like to follow this journey with us, subscribe. Karim left the hospital 3 weeks later. He walked slowly, leaning on a wooden cane his father had. The scars on his face were already beginning to heal, but the marks of that night, the unseen one, would remain forever. His family celebrated as if it were a miracle. They slaughtered a lamb, called the neighbors, and filled the house with food and music. Everyone wanted to touch this young man who had survived the impossible. Everyone had a theory about his recovery. Allah has protected you, his mother said, kissing his forehead repeatedly. You have a purpose, the father said proudly. Karim smiled and accepted the hugs, but inside he carried a secret weighed more heavily than all the fractures. A secret that, if revealed, would turn this miracle into a family tragedy. 2 days after leaving the hospital, he texted me from a new number. I need to see you. Argana Cafe, tomorrow at 4. Cafe Argana was located in Jama' El Fna Square, surrounded by tourists, street vendors, and the unique chaos of Marrakech. It was the perfect place for a discreet meeting. Amidst the crowd, Two men were talking, trying to hide from the city's curious gaze. I arrived early and sat on the second-floor terrace, where I could observe the entire bustling square, waiting for Karim to arrive. I watched the snake charmers, the henned women offering their designs, the children chasing the pigeons scattered around the square. Karim limped in, struggling up the stairs. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that belied the scars that marred his face. He sat across from me, ordered a mint tea, and waited for the waiter to leave before speaking. "I haven't been able to sleep," he confessed bluntly. "Every night I close my eyes and see that light. I hear that voice. I wake up hungry, a hunger I can't satisfy with It's the hunger for God," I replied, knowing full well what It's normal to feel that way. It's good, but also confusing when we don't yet know what to do with it. "My family watches me all the time," he continued, his voice thick with weariness. "My mother won't even let me go to the bathroom alone. My brothers sleep in my room to take care of me. I don't have a single moment of privacy." So, together, we devised a simple but effective plan. Karim would say he needed walks to strengthen his legs, an excuse to escape the constant surveillance. I would pick him up at different points around the city so no one would suspect anything. Hidden cafes, quiet parks, even in my car parked on dead-end streets. Our first official meeting took place in a public garden near the Palmerol, a grove of centuries-old palm trees north of the city. It was a warm April day. We sat on a bench under the shade of a date palm, and I hid a small Bible inside a sports magazine. "Let's start at the beginning," he said, opening the book to Genesis, the story of creation. We read together, word for word. Karim absorbed everything like dry land finally receiving rain. He interrupted me constantly with restless questions. Did God really create everything in 6 days? Why did he allow Adam and Eve to sin if he knew they would sin? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? Some questions had clear answers. Others I could only offer my limited understanding. But Karim wasn't looking for a perfect teacher. He was looking for someone willing to walk alongside him. Weeks passed, and we met 3 times a week, sometimes more. We explored the Old Testament, focusing on stories that reflected his own life. Moses fleeing Egypt, David hiding from Saul, Daniel praying in secret. Everyone had to choose between obeying God or men. Karim observed one of those days. "No one has an easy path," quoting. He himself said, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." Karim unconsciously touched the scars on his. "I think this is my cross," he said softly. His transformation was subtle but real. He stopped cursing, began treating his mother with more patience, forgave a neighbor who owed him money, and helped an old man carry bags at the market without expecting anything in return. His family attributed all of this to the accident. The accident made him more mature, they said, never imagining the true secret he carried in his chest. A month after we began our meetings, Karim looked me in the eyes and said, with that firmness that only comes from within, "I want to be baptized." He spoke with a calm but irresistible conviction. "I read about it in the Gospels," he explained. "Jesus was baptized. The early Christians were too. I want to do the same." I was silent for a moment, considering all that meant in our context. "Karim, this is complicated here," I warned. "We can't do anything in public, not even inside the house. It's too dangerous." He took a deep breath and replied without hesitation. "Then we'll do it in secret, wherever we need to, in the desert, in the mountains. But I want to do it." I spoke to Just that same night. He listened to me silently, his arms crossed and his eyes worried. "Are you sure it's real? What if it's a trap? What if he's trying to betray us?" "Just," I replied. I saw him change before my eyes. I saw his hunger for God, the sincerity in his questions, the transformation in his way of life. "It's not an act." He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "If you believe, I believe too. But be careful." We scheduled the baptism for a Friday morning before sunrise. The place was isolated, an ancient, dry riverbed, about 30 kilometers from Marrakesh, near Amizmiz. At the end of that season, a trickle of clear water still ran through it, coming from the Atlas Mountains. There were only 4 of us. Karim, me, Yusuf, and Layla, who insisted on being a witness. We each left in a different car, taking different routes, so as not to attract attention. We arrived when the sky was still gray, and the first rays of sunlight were beginning to touch the red rocks of the desert. The landscape was arid and majestic, and that small stream looked like liquid silver in the morning light. Karim took off his shoes and walked to the water. He was shivering, but not from the cold. "Are you ready?" I asked. "More than ever," he replied with a smile that mixed fear and joy. We entered together. The water was freezing, cutting into our ankles, but it brought an indescribable peace. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Karim, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? That he died for your sins and rose again on the 3rd day?" He replied without hesitation. "And you promise to follow him, whatever the cost?" "I promise." "Then, With a firm voice and a racing heart, I declared, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I baptize you." I dipped Karim into the water, and for a moment, he disappeared beneath the surface. When he emerged, sunlight was already illuminating the valley, and tears were streaming down his face. Layla and Yusuf clapped silently, overcome with emotion. We embraced there, 4 people hidden in the middle of nowhere, celebrating a new birth the world would never recognize, but which the entire sky was witnessing. When we returned to the city, Karim was no longer the same. Now he was my brother in Christ. Not just a friend or disciple, but part of the same spiritual family. And, as happens with those truly reached by God, he couldn't keep quiet. Prudently, he began to share his story with other young people. He spoke of the lights, the voice that called to him, the peace that had replaced hatred. Some laughed, others just listened, but 3 of them began to ask serious questions, dangerous questions. Our little community began to grow, even under the fear. And, as always happens when light shines in dark places, someone began to notice. It all started subtly, almost imperceptibly. On a muggy Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from Yusuf. His voice was tense. "Omar, have you noticed anything strange lately?" "Strange how?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "A man, always the same. I've seen him 3 times this week, standing near my house. He watches, but pretends he's just passing by. He was always there, standing on the corner, smoking a cigarette, staring. But when I left, he simply disappeared like a ghost." I asked myself, could this be surveillance? I couldn't say for sure, but something inside me told me it wasn't normal. 2 days later, Layla said she was experiencing the same thing. A gray car, discreet but constant, appeared every time she left the hospital, following her for a few blocks before driving away. Never close enough to be obvious, but close enough to send a chill down her spine. And then came Samir, the young engineer, and one day, 2 men in cheap suits showed up at his office, introducing themselves as occupational safety inspectors. They seemed normal, but the questions they asked were strange, unrelated to his work. Where did he spend his Friday afternoon? Who did he meet? What did he read in his free time? It was all very suspicious. We then decided to suspend our meetings for 2 weeks, a precautionary pause, to try to avoid further problems. But what we thought would protect us wasn't enough. The unexpected happened. One Friday morning, the police raided Fatima's house. There were 3 officers in official uniforms and 2 men in plain clothes. They entered without warning, pushing open the door and rummaging through everything quickly and aggressively. They turned over mattresses, opened cabinets, and broke floorboards, searching for something. Fatima's husband tried to resist, to protest, but one of the plainclothes men forcefully pushed him against the wall. "Keep quiet if you know what's best for you," he warned coldly. They found a Bible, wrapped in a blanket, hidden inside an old clothes trunk. It was as if they had discovered a dangerous weapon. The officer in charge held the book up, looking at it with contempt. "What is this?" he asked, knowing full well the answer. Fatima didn't answer, just closed her eyes and prayed silently. They took her to the Medina police station, where she was questioned for 6 long hours. They wanted names, addresses, meeting times. They wanted to know who led the group, who brought the Bibles, who was converting people. But Fatima wouldn't budge. She didn't give up a single name or a single address. At the end of the day, they released her with a grim warning. "We know more than you know. If we find this trash in your house again, you won't get off so easy next time." That same night, Fatima called Yusuf, crying, her voice trembling and almost exhausted. He immediately called an emergency meeting at his house. We knew the risk, but there was no other choice. One by one we arrived, faces etched with fear and anxiety. Yusuf got straight to the point. "The police know exactly where to look. They know what to ask. It's no coincidence." "Who?" Samir asked, looking at everyone suspiciously. "Someone who's among us but isn't one of us," Layla interrupted. "It could be a neighbor, someone who heard our voices singing, someone who saw a lot of movement coming and going. But I'm sure it's something bigger." The police had too much specific information. They used these interrogations to fuel rumors among neighbors, to create distrust, fear, to divide our group. 2 days later, the second attack came. This time, it was at Samir's home. The same men, the same brutality. They broke his laptop searching for files, confiscated his books, and dragged him off for interrogation about alleged subversive activities against the state and the national faith. Samir resisted as much as he could, but left that day completely destroyed. That night, he called me, his voice trembling, almost a whisper filled with, "Omar, I have a family, 2 young children. I can't risk being arrested, losing my job, or watching them grow up without a father." I understood, even as my heart silently broke. He continued, "I'm going to Spain. I have a cousin in Madrid. I want to apply for religious asylum. I've already bought the ticket. I'm leaving on Monday." I didn't try to convince him to stay. By what authority could I ask for such a sacrifice? "Go in peace, brother. I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. God will be with you there too. News of his departure spread quickly, and fear began to spread like wildfire. Others also began to consider fleeing. A young couple with a baby, close friends, decided to try their luck in France. They had tourist visas and had no plans to return. Others chose to hide. Ahmed, an older brother, went to live with his son in the Atlas Mountains, in a village called Imlil, far from everything. Rashid simply disappeared. No one knew where he was, and perhaps it was for the best. Our community, which once numbered 15, shrank to 6 in less than 2 weeks. Youssef, Layla, Fatima, Karim, myself, and an older sister named Nadia, who refused to flee. God didn't call me to, she said with conviction. He called me to stay. We gathered one last time at Yusuf's house. This time, no songs, no Bibles in sight. Just the 6 of us sitting in a circle, trying to absorb what was happening. This is real persecution, Yusuf said, his voice weary and filled with deep sadness. It's not a metaphor, nor an exaggeration. It's the price of following Christ, where it's not allowed. So what do we do? Nadia asked, doubt evident in her eyes. Give up? Let fear overcome us? No, Karim replied, with a firmness that surprised me. We can't give up. I burned the Bible. I mocked God, and he didn't give up on me. How could I give up now? His words fell like stones into a calm lake, creating ripples that hit us all. Karim is right, I said, but we need to be more careful, more wise. No large gatherings for now, no house parties. Let's meet in pairs, in public places, like friends over coffee. What about the Bibles? Layla asked, worried. Let's digitize everything, I replied. Memorize passages, save copies on flash drive. We can hide, but still stand firm. What about the new believers? The 3 young men Karim is discipling? Fatima asked. Karim leaned forward, determined. I take responsibility. I will teach them one by one in complete secrecy, without them knowing about the others until it is safe. So we decided. We wouldn't run away, but we wouldn't be reckless either. We would adapt, survive, and continue spreading the faith, even if it was in whispers. But one question remained in the air, heavy, suffocating. Who had betrayed us? The answer came a week later, in the most painful way possible. It was a quiet night when Yusuf called me. His voice was barely above a whisper. Omar, come to my house now. I've found out who you are. I drove through the empty streets of Marrakech, my heart racing, filled with apprehension. When I arrived, Yusuf was sitting in the living room, holding a piece of paper with trembling hands. He trembled as he spoke. It was my neighbor, Yusuf said, unable to look up. Ibrahim, the man who lives 2 houses down from me. I blinked in disbelief. Ibrahim, who seemed so ordinary, always polite, a carpet merchant in his 50s, a man who greeted everyone with a smile. Police. He told them everything. How do you know? I asked. Just said his son overheard his father talking to another neighbor, bragging about having cleansed the neighborhood of traitors. He said it was a sacred duty to protect the true faith. It wasn't for money, nor was it out of spite. It was conviction. He truly believed he was doing the right thing. And now, what do we do? I asked, anguish tightening my chest. Yusuf looked up, his eyes red but steady. Let's pray for him, he said simply, and move forward. Because if we run away now, if we let fear win, then we'll lose. It's not Ibrahim who wins, it's fear. And fear would not win. That night, we knelt together and prayed for Ibrahim. We asked God to touch his heart, to open his eyes to the truth, to save him from that spiritual blindness. It was one of the hardest prayers of my life, because forgiving and loving someone who betrays you so closely hurts. It hurts so much. But that's what it means to follow Jesus. To love even when it doesn't make sense, even when the betrayal comes from someone who lives 2 doors away. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years since I watched the pages of the burned Bible twist in the flames. Since I heard Karim's fierce challenge echo Yusuf's house, and I thought all was lost. But today, holding a new Bible in my hands, I see things differently. God never loses. He just plants the seeds in ways we don't understand. This Bible is different from the one they burned. Small, with thin pages, bound to look like a simple brochure. It came from a secret network of believers in Tangier, sent in packages hidden among used clothing or car parts. I open it, take a deep breath. The smell of new paper, of fresh ink, is pure hope. It's the opposite of the acrid smell of smoke that has seared itself into my memory. But whenever I smell that scent, I'm reminded of the price of faith. Now I'm in a small apartment in the Gueli neighborhood, sitting across from a 17-year-old boy named Murdy. His eyes are sunken, marked by the pain of many tears. He told me that his father beats him when he finds New Testament verses scribbled in his notebook. His mother stops talking, and his brothers call him a traitor. Is it worth it? He asks, his voice breaks. Is it worth losing everything for this? I think about giving verses, reciting promises, but I choose to tell Karim's story. I speak of the young man who burned the Bible and defied God, I speak of the white light that shone in the darkness, of the voice that spoke 4 words that changed everything. I speak of the persecutor who became a disciple. Murdy's eyes fill with tears, but this time they're different. They're tears of recognition, of hope. And where is he now? With a mixture of curiosity. In the Atlas Mountains, I reply. I told Murdy that Karim is discipling other young people, forming a secret community of believers in villages where no one would ever imagine a church existed, because that's exactly what he's doing now. After the attacks, Karim decided the city was too dangerous to continue, so he headed for the mountains, the Atlas Mountain, where traditions are different, where surveillance is less, and where he can move more freely. The last time we spoke, he told me there are now 12 believers in his network, 12 people who meet in caves, in open fields under the stars, in the homes of pastors who ask no questions. He smiled, breaking the scars on his face, and said, "The pages I burned have multiplied. For everyone they destroyed, God planted 10 more hearts." Yusuf is still in Marrakech, but he had to move to another neighborhood because his neighbor, Ibrahim, kept watching him. Yusuf lost his job at the spice shop when the owner discovered his faith. He now works as a mechanic in a motorcycle repair shop. Ironic, considering it was a motorcycle that nearly took the life of the man who is now his closest brother. Layla remains at the hospital, using her position to quietly minister to dying patients, whispering to them about the hope she has found in Christ. 3 nurses have already been converted thanks to her quiet testimony. Fatima finally fled, not out of fear, but because her husband threatened to kill her, saying he would divorce her and take their children away. She is now in Barcelona, in a church that welcomes refugees of faith. She writes to me every month, saying she prays for us daily. She talks about how much she misses Marrakech, but knows that God has placed her exactly where she needs to be. Our community is no longer the same as it once was. We're no longer 15 people singing together with the windows closed. We're 6 in Marrakech, 12 in the mountains, 15 scattered across Europe. We're still connected, we're still a family, and we're still growing. Murdy looks at me with that mix of fear and hope I recognize so well. I want to follow Jesus, he says, but I'm afraid. Fear never completely disappears, I answer sincerely. I still feel fear every time I meet someone, every time I open the Bible, every time I pray out loud. But fear no longer controls me, because there is something greater, love. The love of a God who hasn't given up on me, who hasn't given up on Karim, and who won't give up on you. We spend the next hour reading together. I tell him about Jesus, on the cross, in the empty tomb, in the promise that he will never leave us, nor forsake us. When he leaves, I'm left alone in the apartment. I go to the window and look out at the city where I was born. Marrakech, with its noisy markets and silent secrets, its visible beauty and hidden pain. I think of Ibrahim, the neighbor who betrayed us. I've prayed for him hundreds of times. I don't know yet if God has touched his heart, but I never stop praying, because that's how it works. We pray for those who persecute us. We love those who hate us. We bless those who curse us. Not because we're perfect, but because we serve a God who is perfect. My phone buzzes. It's a message from Karim. Another young man accepted Christ today. His name is Yunus. He's 19 years old. He burned his own Bible a year ago. God has a sense of humor, don't you think? I smile. Yes, God has a sense of humor, and plans that go far beyond our limited understanding. I close my eyes and pray. I pray for Murdy, for Karim, for Yunus. I pray for those who fled and for those who stayed. I pray for those who don't yet know Christ, but who soon will. I pray for Ibrahim, for Amin, for Hicham, and for you who are listening to this story. Because if I've learned anything in these 2 years, it's that stories of faith serve not only to inform, but to inspire. To remind us that God is still moving, still transforming hearts, still turning ashes into beauty. If you've ever had to choose between silence and faith, if you've ever struggled to believe in the invisible, if you've ever felt alone in your conviction, leave a comment. Thousands of believers are being persecuted right now, in places we can't even. Every like helps this story reach those who need it. Subscribe so we can continue bringing these voices to more hearts. Because these stories exist, and why we decided to tell them together. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you for sticking around. If this story was helpful, please share it with anyone you think needs to hear. This is how love and faith grow, from heart to heart. I carefully close the Bible and put it away. Tomorrow I'll meet another young man. The day after tomorrow another. And I'll continue like this as long as God gives me breath. Because neither fire nor hatred nor persecution can erase the word of God. The pages that burned became seeds, and seeds always find a way to grow.